So we're going to start off by making the box for this. That's the very first step, which is this outside section here. Now, you're going to need a piece cut to 580 millimeters, which is this piece right here. And from there, we're going to go through and we're going to need a few other things. You're going to need, for this step, you're going to need a square, a ruler, a pencil, an eraser, and it's always handy to have a sharpener at the table somewhere so that when the pencil breaks or goes blunt, you can resharpen it. It's very important to note that the lines I'll be drawing are very thick and dense. I don't want you making lines that harsh because ultimately they damage the timber and it's hard to sand them off later. I'm doing them that thick so that you can see them. Now, as we go through, you've got your piece. Let's just begin by writing our name on this piece. So for me, Sam D. Why? Because I know I'm not the only Sam in this class. Let's progress now. Very first thing you want to go through and do is check that your cuts down here are square. Because they've been machine cut, but because they're cut with longer pieces of timber, sometimes the edgings you can't get straight in. And if I'm having a look at this one, you can see that the edge here isn't square. It's not ideal, but it is what it is. And so we just work with that. I'm going to bring it in a little bit further so I can come through and cut that off. So you might be like, but sir, it looks straight. It is straight. It's just not square. After you've done that, we need to measure our first piece. Our first piece is going to be 140 millimeters long. That is 140 millimeters. Now, when we measure a piece, we always measure near the edge of the board, not near the center. Because if it's near the center, it's easy to angle this and not be fully aware. And then all of a sudden, you're getting different measurements from here to here. There's quite a difference. It might only be a mil or two, but it makes a difference when we're making the whole product. So we always mark up near an edge. And you only ever really need to mark one edge because then you've got your square. Making sure that the edge of this is sitting on that line you first drew, coming across and marking that 140 millimeter mark. From there, I'll get my square. Now, I generally like to hold my square like this and move my fingers towards me. Then my thumb can be on it, or depending on the board, it can be across. I often also, when I use a square, because it wants to drop down a bit, I use this forefinger here to push down and lock in. I also have very large hands compared to other people, and so I can make the stretch with ease. But if you can't, holding it like this and this is also fine. So the reason we hold it like this is because it locks in this edge here, which is very important. That needs to be hard up against the board. And then this one just holds it down so it's not bouncing around. And the thumb provides downward pressure. So you want to get it accurate. And then from there, you're going to come across and you're going to draw in your line. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm marking quite dense so you can see the mark. You do not need to mark that dense. In fact, a very light line will be more beneficial because it means if for some reason it's still on your product later, you're not having to try and sand that away and remove excess material because you're not going to be able to rub this out with an eraser. From there, you're going to come across and you're going to measure across 5 millimeters. Now, 5's a bit of excess, but we like to deal with excess because ultimately it's easy to remove timber. It's hard to, you can't re-add it. Not at the skill level that we're working at. We're bringing this across again, lining that up and marking that in. You got your 5 millimeter gap there. Now for these, I also like to write in how long they are. So I'm gonna go 140. So I know what piece it is. From here, we're not gonna measure out another 140. Even though we need 2 of them, top and bottom, we're actually gonna measure the 115. And that way it's gonna hopefully create an almost waterfall effect. So if you go follow the box around, you're gonna be able to see the grain patterns continue. And that's very nice when that's done. I don't believe it was done with this box because the materials are very different, probably also made from offcuts. But let's progress and let's make sure we're doing it with this one. So for this one, we're gonna need 115 millimeters. So lining up to that 5 mil mark, coming down near the edge and marking out 115. Using that square, coming through and marking that again. Now, since we're going to cut this piece, I'm going to write my name on it again. I'm going to write 115. I'm also going to start numbering the pieces so we know that which way they go so that the grain can follow. So I'm going to write 1. I'm going to do an arrow pointing this way. Then I'm going to go 2 and an arrow pointing this way. And that's going to allow me to follow this around as we progress after all the pieces are cut. Once again, we need another 5mm gap. And we mark up near the edge. So I'm not too specific on the 5mm gap because ultimately it doesn't matter, it doesn't impact the measurements. I'm very particular on these measurements here. So for 5mm is 6mm, as long as it's at a square line, it doesn't really matter. We're gonna come across and we're gonna make another 140mm mark. Just doing that there. Measuring out 140. Got my 140 there. So name 140 and 3 with an arrow. Now once again, don't be marking it too hard because ultimately it's going to mess you up in the long run because you've got to remove that material. The last 5mm gap. We're going to come through, we're going to measure the last piece at 115mm. 115. Let's set this up. So I've got my 115, my name, and the number 4. Then I can come through and I'm going to hit this as excess, as waste. Now, the last thing we need to do, we've got 2 more steps. Step 1 is we need to make sure all those lines are square. So I'll often come through from the other side now, just confirm that they're sitting square, and that's fine, that's fine, that's fine. That's fine. Yep. Yes. And yes. The reason we do that is because it's very easy to have this on the slightest angle. And then all of a sudden, instead of sitting square, you're going to have a bit of a weird line going there. And we don't want that. It's going to screw up the whole project. From there, we need to just double check those measurements. So you come through and you double check. 140, 115, 140, 115. We've got all our boards now set and prepped for the next step. So I'll see you in the next tutorial video and good luck.